Good morning. This is Pat O'Connell calling to order the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission regular open meeting. It's Thursday, September 19th at 10 a.m. We're here in the Bochum building. Mr. Reddick Martinez, please call the roll.
Commissioner Ellison.
Present.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Present.
Commissioner O'Connell.
Present.
All commissioners are present and you have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. So we'll start with our Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioners, we've got the agenda that was posted in advance of this meeting. Are there any changes we need to make before proceeding?
I do not have any changes, Chairman.
I don't either. Thank you.
Okay, so seeing no changes, we will proceed with the agenda as posted. Public comment. Is there anybody here that would like to give public comment today? Seeing none. And then Jordan, do we have anyone who registered online at the last minute?
No public comment. No.
Okay, thank you. Next up, announcements. Mr. Reddick Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any announcements from OGC.
Commissioners, did you have any?
Not from me.
Okay, so just like to highlight that there are a couple of hearings scheduled between now and our next regularly scheduled open meeting. First one is Monday, September 30th, case 24-00238 UT. That's P&M's hedging plan. So that's scheduled again to start at 9 o'clock Monday morning. If you're interested, information on the webpage. Similarly, case 24-00203 is scheduled to have a hearing on Tuesday the 1st. That one's scheduled to start at 10 a.m. In that regard, again, gas company's IRP. And then again, October 3rd, we'll be back here for regular open meeting. And then I just had one more announcement. Is Kevin Gedko here?
Kevin's actually taking some well-deserved time off.
Oh, well, the announcement is we found the belt. So please make sure our current employee of the month has the employee of the month belt. With the understanding they'll surrender it when we have a new employee of the month.
I didn't realize that was an actual item.
Well, I think that Mr. Lundeen had hidden it in his garage. We'll find out because he's on the agenda, right? Yeah. Okay, so next item on the agenda is approval of prior meeting minutes. We have sets of minutes for two meetings in the package. One is August 22nd, 2024. The other is August 29th, 2024. Commissioners, did you have any comments or changes on the minutes?
I did have minor changes that I included in board effect. I don't remember exactly where they are in the agenda, but they're small.
Yeah, similarly, I had one and it was one of our many acronyms.
Yeah.
I didn't have any suggestions.
Okay, so it sounds like we're ready to approve the minutes that are in board effect. So I will move approval of the minutes for August 22nd and August 29th.
I second.
Commissioner Ellison.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell.
Aye.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Aye.
The motion to approve the minutes for the open meetings on August 22nd and the special open meeting on August 29th with the modifications as posted on Board Effect passes unanimously, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next up is the consent action items. We've got 3 cases on the consent agenda. Commissioners, did you have any discussion, questions on those items?
Was just one remark I wanted to make, Mr. Chair, regarding the second item, 24-197, the inmate calling solutions annual report filing. I see that we are most likely about to deny their filing due to more procedural issues. However, I would be interested in having, if they do refile for a protective order, I would be interested in seeing that on the regular action items in the future.
Just for clarification, you want to see motions for protective order or just that particular party?
Well, I guess I was more referring to that party. It could extend to other protective orders, but it's just obviously they have an approved tariff, and I'm just uncertain what it might be that they are seeking to protect, since the economic side of things, I don't see a justification for protecting that. So I guess I'm speaking in particular about this company, but in general, I am interested in why a party is seeking a protective order.
Okay, I understand. And then we have a similar motion that item 3, and that did explain why they were asking for protection. Did you have any questions about that?
No, I did not.
Okay. Any other questions, discussion? So I will move for adoption of the proposed orders on the consent agenda.
Second.
Commissioner Aguilera,
Aye.
Commissioner Ellison,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell.
Aye.
The motion to approve the 3 items on the consent agenda passes unanimously, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. Next up is case 2300294, rulemaking related to compliance with the Energy Transition Act. Presentation from Mr. Lundin.
Morning, Commissioners. My presentation today will be shorter than normal, given that we discussed this matter in detail at the last open meeting. So to get straight into it, I have 2 options for your consideration today. The options comprise a proposed rule and a draft final order. And I will go through the differences. There's 3 main differences between option 1 and 2. As of kind of midday yesterday, there was an option 3, but that has since been revoked from consideration. So jumping into the rule, which is a rule for carbon dioxide emissions measurement and compliance pursuant to the ETA. The first kind of main difference between option 1 and 2 is the definition of compliance period. Option 1 would provide a annual compliance period, and option 2 would provide a triennial compliance period. Additionally, there is language that has been added in option 1 that is omitted from option 2, and that is clarifying compliance periods for years 2023 and 2024. The second main difference between option 1 and option 2 is how they treat off-system sales. In option 1, the rule would treat off-system sales for informational purposes only, and in option 2, it would be the opposite. So they would be counted in the emissions rate calculation. That is emissions associated with off-system sales. And the third main difference between option one and option two is the section 11 non-compliance section. Option one maintains a schedule of monetary regulatory sanctions that are laid out in the rule, and option two omits that paragraph entirely. So those are the three main differences. Other than that, the rest of the edits in the two rules are identical to each other. And I will stand for question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Lundin, and again, thanks for helping us through this rulemaking process. I guess just get a sense for how the commissioners want to proceed with this. We could do what we've done on other rules where we've got various options and move one of the two and then work through amendment. Also, this one's relatively short. We've already had a discussion on it 2 weeks ago. We could just see where we're at and see if rather than go through one and then make amendments, just pick one and see where the votes fall. Both make sense to me. So I don't know if you have a preference.
You know, I might have a preference, but I wanted to ask a clarifying question to Mr. Lundin. So you mentioned something about after you mentioned the annual versus triennial compliance period, you mentioned something about the years 23 and 24. Can you restate that?
Sure.
And how each order would treat those?
Yeah. So in option one, there's an additional sentence included in the definition of compliance period. And there's also a companion provision down in section 10, but basically it addresses for purposes of annual compliance, it looks at compliance years 2023 and 2024, and basically states that those years will be for informational purposes and the emissions associated from those years won't be tracked in the emissions rate calculation. That language is simply omitted from option two. So there would just be no discussion of 2023 and 2024.
Thank you. Yeah, it seems like I think we probably could talk about these in sort of just these topics that have been described by Mr. Lundin. Although I'm wondering if because the annual and triennial compliance kind of has like trickle down, you know, changes that occur in other parts of the rule, right?
Yes, sir. And it mostly comes down to the section 10 measurement verification compliance section. When you have annual compliance versus triennial compliance, it requires different wording in there just to make it make sense.
Yeah, I'm happy to start with that. This was my rule making, so I'm happy to take the lead on just walking through where I'm at on those three topics. First, is a compliance period. The law was written for reporting and verification every 3 years. During the rulemaking process, we explored all the way from instantaneous, you know, the standard is pounds per megawatt hour, and it doesn't say over what period of time. And then there was comments provided on 1 year versus 3 as where compliance gets measured. Where I've landed on that is the compliance period should be a 1 year period. Lots of reasons for that. One is there's quite a few just natural processes that are kind of on an annual cycle, right? Management of energy demand is kind of a 1 year deal. You've got a winter and a summer and shoulder months. And so systems are set up to think about that on a 1 year basis. And, you know, we tend to look at fuel clause over an annual process. And that's probably the thing that is most bolted to this rule in terms of how utility operates. But the real deciding factor for me is if you go back and read the Renewable Energy Act, there's a zero carbon, which is a zero carbon standard. It's not an emission rate. And in that standard, there's also a requirement for reasonable, consistent progress. So if you're taking a 3-year look at it, conceivably you could have 2 years of well below the emission rate, and then the 3rd year is very high. And so that's not consistent. Having emissions that vary that much over a period might not be reasonable. So anyway, in terms of just management, syncing this rule up to how the world operates, that's just naturally falls within a year. Having a rule that is consistent with the other amendments that got made when the Senate Bill 489 got passed. And then just from the information we've had and the comments received, the 1 year is the best outcome in terms of emissions, because the final thing that's true about an emission rate is we're expecting sales to grow. Rate, you could actually reduce your rate and emit more tons as sales grow. So I think keeping track of that on an annual basis through this interesting time where we're hoping electricity sales grow is what led me to land on the 1 year period. Then the next topic, the off-system sales, that's a very interesting one because if you read P&M's comments, it reads like, hey, I want the flexibility to burn as much gas as I can. I don't think that's really what they meant to say, but that's how their comments come across. The data that they provided, though, I thought was a little more interesting, and especially if you think about the presentations we had during the regional market presentation is, they need flexibility to keep the system reliable. Agree with that concept. Off-system sales could very easily be dominated by, in terms of the emissions rate, the fact that you've got wind and solar that you're trying to avoid curtailing. So when they threw in off-system sales into the bench request data, it actually lowered their rate. So first of all, the law says sales dedicated to your customers, arguable whether off-system sales is there or not. The link is the credit you get from the money you make when you make off-system sales. So I think legally, we could put it in there. I think in terms of managing the rule, I actually think off-system sales might make it easier for them to comply than not. And then, so thinking about how this rule is an incentive to incent the behavior the law wants, I really believe we got to get to the point where people are in this day-ahead market, and that the day-ahead market is doing a good job of telling us not just P&M obviously can tell us what they're generating for sales. I'd kind of like to see offsetting what are they buying when they're buying off the market to see how that matches. So I like that off-system sales is a reporting requirement that it's for information. Don't really want to go past there until I see how we can get information to make good decisions from regional markets. And then finally, penalty schedule. I think it's important just to have, here's what the consequences of not complying with a rule, especially a rule as important as this, right? Big picture ETA is a law that P&M wanted. This is in the law. So asking them to comply with the rule, and if you don't, here's what that might mean, I think is very valuable. So that's where I've always been on the penalty schedule. I also do like the addition that instead of just forking money over to general fund, there might be better things that can be done with that money. And what I'm thinking about there is the law also includes, let's have economic assistance for the community that's most affected by the plant that San Juan's not operating. So I think that's a good balance, is if you don't comply, here's the financial penalty, and why that having a number on a piece of paper is important is while they're making decisions about how to dispatch their fleet, those are economic decisions. So they'll be able to see, it was a better choice to pay the penalty than to meet the rate and come in and show that to us. They also will have opportunity for arguing that penalty money is better spent. So having said all that, I think it's pretty obvious I land on option one without modification as my going in premise for this meeting. But over to debate or other opinions.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that explanation. So in terms of the compliance period, I see what you're saying, Chairman. And there are ways that I can read annual compliance, and just for context, I'm trying to determine what this one paragraph in 18D says. 1810D, sorry, says, and there is a way that I could read this that allows for an annual compliance period with the measurement and verification occurring every 3 years. I don't think this second to last sentence is not necessarily defining the period as 3 years. But I do think we need to make a determination here. And for me, reading this as compliance period occurring every 3 years is the more logical reading of that. And I am further persuaded by the flexibility that might be needed to adjust, over the course of the 3-year period for years that may be out of balance for various reasons. And so I think, that's where I land, is having a triennial compliance period. I think the annual reporting is helpful in that it strikes a reasonable balance between the two, because we still get the annual reporting, but also stick to the letter of the law here as I am reading it, with the 3-year compliance.
Sure, I appreciate all of those comments, and I do understand the rationale for the 1-year compliance period. I again, as I've said before, I don't think the statute is a model clarity in the way that it requires a certain limit or carbon intensity by a certain date, and then calls for a 3-year compliance period. But I think we've got to do the best we can here. Clearly, if you make the limit instantaneous, that's something that the company it would be not possible for the company to attain that. And as you lengthen the time, it becomes easier to attain, because obviously the company will be bringing on new renewable resources on a lumpy schedule. So clearly we've got this continuum where shorter compliance times are going to be harder to meet, and more lengthy compliance periods are going to be easier to meet. To me, the the sentence in this act that clearly specifies compliance shall be measured and verified every 3 years. You know, I have to see that as controlling here, that I think the legislature understood that shorter compliance periods would be harder to meet, and they took that into account in deciding this, and that's where I'm landing on this compliance period question. In terms of the off-system sales being for information only or not, you know, certainly I do think that we should gather that information and that the annual reports should contain that information. That's helpful to us in understanding the volume of off-system sales. But, you know, the way I am reading the statute is that it's primarily concerned with the generation assets, that when it talks about dedicated to serving the qualifying utilities retail customers and talking about the qualifying utilities generation, you know, I really see that as assets on the company's books and long-term power purchase agreement assets. And if you read it that way, it doesn't really matter for whom the power is being generated. It matters that those utility plants are being dispatched. And also, I would say that PNM made comments to bench requests stating that it was really not possible for them to identify, you know, which generator is doing the exporting when they're selling to the market, and that it was very difficult to say what the associated amount of carbon was with those exports. And it seems to me that the status quo for PNM in participating in the energy imbalance market is that you know, they are looking at their fleet emissions, and they're concerned with how are they doing with their emissions per megawatt hour, not dependent on whether that power is going to external sales or not. So I think the status quo is that they're preparing for these Energy Transition Act limitations to apply to sales. And I do think it's a reasonable reading that the legislature was concerned with CO2 emissions in New Mexico, and probably would not be happy with the idea that, you know, we're caring about emissions when the power sales are to New Mexico customers, but, you know, they can run the gas plants as hard as they want if it's exporting to other parts of the West. You know, I just, you know, I have a hard time, you know, reading that into the statute. So, you know, I do have some concerns about whether this decision to include off-system sales in the accounting could negatively impact their participation in markets. It may, or it may not. but the way I'm reading the statute is that is the way that we should handle it. And PNM, in fact, has said they would have difficulty handling it otherwise. They would have difficulty reporting on those sales by themselves. And I guess on the sanctions issue, you know, this was a hard one for me. I honestly have
Commissioner Elson?
yes,
Before we move to that, can I speak to what you just said?
sure. Sure,
Because
of
I
course.
also want to talk about the sanctions, but just so to make it easier to follow our conversation. So my comments earlier were about the compliance period and so kind of responding to your comments and the chairman's comments about the off-system sales. I agree with Commissioner Ellison that I think what the legislature was doing here was focusing on the generation that the utility owns or is contracting for. When 621810D says the qualifying utilities generation and sources of energy procured, and then we know that it's a term of 24 months or longer, I think it's talking about capacity. And so these resources that you have procured in order to meet your retail sales, how much are they emitting? I think that's what the law is trying to control. And I agree with what Commissioner Ellison said that there is an opportunity for greenwashing if you think about it otherwise, because the utility could then sell some of their own generation to somebody else and then purchase renewable energy. And so there's an opportunity there to circumvent the law, and I don't think that's what the legislature wanted here. And so the word dedicated in this paragraph here also means a lot to me, because it's not talking about sales to meet the retail customer's load. It's talking about the resources dedicated to meet the retail customer's load. And so on that point, I also agree that including off-system sales in the formula, so not as informational, is the right approach here. And so I wanted to respond to that. And Commissioner Ellison, you were going to say something about the sanctions. I have something to say about that too, but I interrupted you. Please go ahead.
That's fine. It was good to follow up on that while it was fresh. The sanctions is a tough one for me, and I honestly have been back and forth on this particular issue. I could actually accept a schedule of sanctions as outlined in option 1. I would want to specify that it would not apply to the first compliance period, that would need to be more ad hoc. I suppose, but I'm also happy with what option 2 has in I think giving the commission more discretion as to a sanction. So one advantage, I suppose, of the schedule is that it offers more clarity to the utility as to what level of sanctions it may expect. and puts them on notice of that. On the other hand, I think there is the presumption that the commission ought to use that schedule. And clearly there can be extenuating circumstances why we might not want to impose that. If the company was acting in good faith and a number of projects were delayed for reasons outside the company's control, I think, those would all be mitigating circumstances that we would want to consider. And having that fixed schedule makes it more difficult. There is also the possibility that we may find that the company did not achieve the required standards willfully, and that perhaps we might want to be tougher than the schedule that has been outlined. So on balance, I do prefer what is in option 2 now, where it gives the commission maximum flexibility and discretion. And I think the potential for higher sanctions and sort of the uncertainty of what might happen, I think in and of itself is a motivating factor. I think the company would not want to be labeled as non-compliant. I think they've got every incentive to comply, especially when new resources to help them comply would be paid for by the ratepayer. Yet I also agree that the possibility of sanctions needs to be real, and the company needs to understand that that there are consequences to willful non-attainment of these standards.
Yeah, so on the sanctions, I did really like the idea of having them listed. And my concern though is that I don't think that they were high enough. And maybe this schedule here was designed with the idea of an annual compliance in mind, which would have helped a lot. And with the transition to a 3-year compliance, it's a lot lower. And I think the comments by staff and WRA to me showed that they were low already, even in an annual compliance context. And so in the absence of feeling like we have the right numbers here, I think that it is better to leave that decision to the future, even though it doesn't provide the benefit anymore of knowing what the penalty could be. There are other concerns. I think, the penalty over time will become even lower. And Chairman, you mentioned something about the utility being able to compare what the penalty is versus their operations. And I think that is a concern, because I don't think this is a law that was intended to not be met. I mean, when we think about what the incentives here are, I think of a couple. One of them is that this is a law and it's a mandate, and there was no flexibility built in, aside from, the 3-year compliance, that the utility should not meet these mandates. And I think if we give them a penalty structure that is too low, they will be able to see that and decide if it's better to not meet the law. And so that's a concern for me. And the other incentive here is the ability to penalize. And I think we undermine that incentive if we inadvertently adopt a penalty structure that is too low. And so for me, removing this and just putting the utility on notice that they could be penalized, including the potential to remedy it some other way, aside from just paying a penalty and reverting that to the Treasury, I think that is, given the circumstances, a better approach for me.
Okay, thank you. So having listened to both of that, it's reasonable. Just want to respond, starting with, the law. If we're going to try to put ourselves in legislators' shoes, the ETA is about climate. And so rather than trying to craft a rule around how people might appeal, we should put ourselves in the shoes of trying to create the best climate rule we can. And so best climate rule we can, based on the data and the record, is an annual compliance period. In terms of off-system sales, climate's about energy. So we need to be tracking emissions associated with energy, tying it to capacity. I understand the argument there, but I don't think that's the right outcome if you're thinking about climate, because for reliability, you could have capacity that hopefully never gets used, right? But is that capacity dedicated to service? I think when you think counting emissions, it's about how did you create the energy? And so it's not a capacity issue, it's an energy issue. I agree with Commissioner Ellison that the real incentive here isn't dollars. I mean, I agree with you that these are probably too low if we're looking at a 3-year. I also don't think we can impose penalties big enough to address the harm based on what's there. So then it becomes about incentive. And the big incentive is don't have a dollar on your books that you can't recover. So it doesn't take a large number in terms of penalties for the rule to incent behavior. So that's why I was okay with a schedule that's less than what the comments in the record justify a higher number. I also do believe that, just use as an example, last summer, that it doesn't really apply to this rule because they were short-term purchases, right? But you had a situation where PNM didn't have the resources they need for summer peak. So they went and bought a bunch of power on the market in a short-term basis. They should be making that decision knowing that they're going to have the risk of being not in compliance, having penalties, knowing what the penalties will be, and then clear-eyed choice. Do I lean into that and come in asking for a variance or something if something like that happens? If we're trying to set money to address the harm, then that's too big of a well to create a rule that incents behavior. So anyway, I really firmly believe, we've talked about this before, whether regulators are fulfilling a legislative function or a judicial function. In the face of ambiguity, legislature has told us create a rule that addresses climate. So I'm going to be a legislator and I'm going to pick the rule that has, I think, the most impact on climate. And so again, also back to the off-system sales, the data shows us the rule's not as stringent if we include off-system sales. But I want the information to know that for sure. So anyway, I've heard you. I understand where both of you are coming from. They're not unreasonable positions, but I'm unswayed and I'm still on option one.
So, Chairman, I think you're right that, you know, this is not about capacity. It's about energy in the sense that capacity is not creating emissions, right? It's when you're running it. And so I agree with that, and that, you know, that's to, I guess, further refine what I meant is that I think it's the emissions created by either the utility owned capacity or the utility contracted for capacity. And so that could be more or less depending on how much those resources run.
Okay, so then it circles me back to where we started. Should we move an option and then work to amend it, or vote on one option or another? And having said that, I am not voting for option 2.
Yeah, I think the one thing we have not, oh, okay, so just I wanted to, sorry, I'm thinking things in my head and not saying them out loud. On the years 23 and 24, option 2 says nothing about that, and so essentially kicks the can down the road. Potentially the qualifying utility here could be penalized or could not. Is that correct?
That's correct, Commissioner. When the commission embarks on its triennial measurement and verification process sometime down the road, then it would make a decision at that point in time what to do with emissions in those years.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I think, you know, maybe it's time for us to make a motion and then discuss it, if that works. Okay, so I would move to adopt option 2, which is the one that includes the triennial compliance.
I second.
So then my question is, are you open to amendments to option 2?
Yeah, I think it would be great to discuss it.
Okay, so then working down the list, you're gonna see where my amendments are gonna go, which is to try to create option 1 out of option 2. So compliance period, I'm unswayed by the arguments in favor of a 3-year period. What I heard was we're afraid of an appeal. Well, let's not judge that appeal when the appeal hasn't even happened. So then in that world, let's lean into writing a rule that is workable and will have the most impact on climate, and that's an annual compliance period. So I would move to amend the compliance period in option 2 from triennial to annual.
Mr. Chair, I have to remain on my previous position, and of course, consideration of appeals is a factor, but I also believe that the legislature could have specified verification annually, but chose not to, and I think it is problematic for us to be more stringent than the legislature has been here. So that's why I believe we should stay with the 3-year period.
Yeah, I will not second that either. But I do want to respond because I don't know where I was hearing that we're afraid of an appeal. That is, yeah, that caught me off guard a little bit, at least based on my comments. You know, I think there is a situation here where the utility could be penalized for priors or not prior, sorry, I should not have said that, for the years after January 1, 2023, which is what is the date in the law. I think that if, for instance, if there's a situation where later a party, after having received the triennial compliance, a party can demonstrate that the utility was negligent in not meeting the law, I think we could penalize them for that. And so I don't think that whether we will get an appeal or not is a basis here for me preferring a triennial compliance period. For me, that is solely based on how I am reading the law here.
Yeah, it could be I went too far with that, but what I heard from both of you was interpretation of an ambiguous portion of the law. And so faced with ambiguity, we have discretion, responsibility to write a rule that cleans up that ambiguity. ETA is about climate. The best outcome that addresses climate is an annual compliance period. And then it also cleans up the, what do we do about the last 2 years? Like, well, annual compliance period, first year is next year. So we don't have to worry about any of that kind of stuff. It's what creates the best rule going forward, what's in harmony with the other climate facing laws like the Renewable Energy Act. So anyway, that maybe I jumped to a conclusion, but if we're sitting here trying to interpret ambiguity and we're not leaning into the thing that isn't ambiguous, which is this is about climate, then I'm led by the memo we received, which was about legal risk. So that's how I got there.
Yeah, and you know, on the ambiguity, there is some. However, I think that the text more clearly reads in favor of a triennial compliance period, although I did say that I could read the other version. And so I think you know, we have the same responsibility here to interpret that ambiguity, and it sounds like we land in a different place, which is fine. One of the things that, you know, because this is about climate, it's also about a deal that was offered to the utility, and the utility took up that deal. The part about the climate is, you know, you mentioned consistent and reasonable progress. That is built into this law, and it is also in other laws. It's built into this law because the CO2 pounds that can be emitted reduce in the future by half. And so kind of tying those two things together, I think what the legislature was doing here is setting up this deal that helps the utilities' resources reduce emissions. We also have other laws that push us in the same direction. And while there is consistent and reasonable progress that needs to be made each and every year, there's also flexibility within longer term periods. You know, we have milestones, for example, under the RPS, where, you know, there a certain percentage in a given year, you know, 5 years later, they're another percentage. And so I think they're, collectively, the actions of the utility to meet that law and the law itself are guiding us in through the energy transition.
Are you willing to entertain any other amendments to option 2?
Yeah, I certainly am. Do you have amendments that you would like to propose?
Well, I did propose amending option 2, so it's option 1.
Oh, option 1. Okay, yes, amending it to look like option 2. Sorry, I misunderstood. I think I would end up where option 2 is. If we went through those changes, the differences that Mr. Lundin explained.
Is there any other questions or discussion?
I mean, I think there's one area where, we might think about whether a change is appropriate. In option 1, obviously with the annual compliance periods, it was possible to say, we're not going to look at 23 and 24. With the 3-year period, which I think is the correct period to use, you have the issue that, you don't want to say, we'll give you a free pass on emissions in 2025. So, but, and so therefore, I think that this version in option number 2 is silent with the understanding that, the commission is obviously going to use discretion and weigh the facts of the matter. But I guess I'm wondering if there's a third option on that initial compliance period, or whether it's hard to do any better than what we've done here.
I have a suggestion. Annual compliance period.
I do understand that.
Yeah, and I do want to say that even though in option 2 there is a triennial compliance period, again, to highlight that there is annual reporting here. So it is being tracked. And even with the including the off-system sales, this rule is also asking for information about other energy that is being used to meet the retail customers' load. So there is a lot of information that is coming in, and I think the information that you're looking for, Chairman, you could tell me if you disagree, but I think all of the information that you're looking for will be coming in each year.
Yeah, I think I've addressed that. I hear what you're saying. I am unconvinced because I think addressing climate requires being bold. And I don't think option 2 does that. So if other folks have more discussion, if you feel like it'd be productive to explore other amendments to option 2, let's do that. If not, call for a vote is where I'm at.
Okay, I don't have any amendments to propose to option 2.
Okay, to recap the state of play here, we have a motion to adopt option 2 that has been seconded. Commissioner Ellison. Commissioner O'Connell.
No,
Oh, and
you're asking for the vote, or were you asking if I had seconded?
you had seconded it.
Yes, I had.
And a vote, Commissioner Ellison, on adopting.
Aye.
option 2. Aye. Okay. Commissioner O'Connell, you were nay.
yes, I'm nay, and I think I've explained myself, so I don't feel a need to explain. I am trying to process voting against my own rule, but I really think we are not doing the right thing here.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Aye.
The motion to adopt order number 2 passes on a vote of 2 yeses and 1 no.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you. Thank you again, Mr. Lundin. Next item on the agenda is case 24-00133 UT. A presentation by Ms. Avila Stefans. Take it away.
Good morning, commissioners. So this is a regular annual item that's usually on the consent agenda item, but this year's order is a little different, so OGC thought it appropriate to present on those differences as a regular agenda item. So the state commissions that want ETCs to receive high-cost support from the Federal Universal Service Fund must certify that the ETCs have used that high-cost support this past year and will use the support in this upcoming year in a manner accordance with the purpose of the Federal Universal Service Fund. And so every year the commission opens a docket to receive FCC annual reports and self-certifications, and staff provides a thorough report and recommendations to the commission. And I have to acknowledge the amount of work that goes into this report. It's a 200-page report summarizing the history of these ETCs, summarizing the reporting requirements for each ETC based on their federal funding they receive, and then provides a recommendation. And the way the commission certifies is that the commission jumps on the fund administrator's website, which is USAC. So it's a USAC e-filing portal, and USAC auto-populates a list that the commission of ETCs that can be recertified. So this year, the order reduces staff's recommendation to 4 lists. The first list is Exhibit A, which is a list of ETCs to be recertified, adopting staff's recommendation. Exhibit B is a list of ETCs not to be recertified because they have relinquished their ETC designation. And the order asks those ETCs to work with USAC to get their names off of the auto-populated list. Exhibit C is a list of ETCs not to be recertified because, as per staff report, they receive mobility funds, which only requires a 5-year reporting requirement. And the New Mexico ETCs that receive these mobility funds have completed their 5-year reporting requirements and no longer need to be recertified. But in the event that they still want to be recertified for whatever reason, the order allows those ETCs to provide a self-certification, and the commission will certify them along with the other ETCs. And then there is Exhibit D. And so this year, OGC jumped onto the USAC portal and compared staff's list to the auto-populated list and found a couple of discrepancies. One carrier is on staff's list to be recommended for recertification, or excuse me, is recommended by staff to be recertified, but is not on USAC's list. And so the commission can't recertify it because there is nothing, they are just not on the list. But the order allows that carrier to work with USAC to be added onto the list. And if they are on the list on the day of recertification, the commission would recertify them based on staff's recommendation. And then there's a second carrier that's not on staff's list to be recertified, but is on the USAC auto-populated list. And that may be a mistake on USAC's part, but if it is, the order allows that carrier to motion the commission for recertification, provide the required documents and a self-certification. And I may add that Commissioner Aguilera suggested that for that second carrier on Exhibit D, that the order add that any recertification approval be permitted via single signature order. And I stand for questions.
Thank you for that. Commissioners, do you have any questions, discussion on this one?
Yeah, I just want to explain a little bit further the latest edition. So it came to me this morning, so sorry for not providing it earlier, but there are a couple of companies in Exhibit D, as Ms. Avila Stefans explained, that are not being recertified. And there is also a deadline, or we should recertify them by October 1st. If they're, and then there's a little bit of a grace period, but then if they're not recertified, the funding that they receive could be reduced. So that their customers receive the full benefit of the funding that they could receive, if they indeed want to be recertified, I wanted to provide for the opportunity for us to approve the recertification via single signature order, since our next open meeting is not going to be until October 3rd. And so it's unclear, based on the conflicting evidence, whether they want to be recertified. But I think including that addition of allowing them to be recertified via single signature order could benefit them if, we could get it done in time.
Ms. Allison, do you have any questions, discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Ms. Stefans, I have a few questions. The Universal Service Administrative Company. So what is it that they do?
So they are the fund administrator for the federal Universal Service Fund. So they kind of manage the disbursements and certifications.
And if a company is not on their list, does that mean that they cannot be designated a federal eligible telecommunications carrier?
Now, I'm not quite sure why this carrier is not on the list or how USAC auto-populates this list. I just know that it's auto-populated and the commission can't add on to it.
And so, but we couldn't designate, in this case, we've got NMPRC and Plateau Telecommunications. We could not designate them as eligible telecommunications carriers if they are not on this Universal Service Administrative Company list.
So to clarify, they are already designated ETC as eligible. They're just not certified as having used the money in accordance with the purpose of the fund. So they probably have ETC status that we just can't certify them because they're not on the list.
We can't recertify them, so we cannot nominate them for this federal ETC designation.
So they are designated, so they can
Okay.
receive the money. It's just the certification, it's just like a check in the box before they can get the money. That makes sense.
I'm glad this is so clear.
I know.
Maybe it is to everyone else. So certification, is it a requirement for a company to receive federal funds?
It is a requirement for certain funds.
Certain funds, okay.
Yes.
Okay, but this whole federal ETC eligible telecommunication carrier designation has no impact on our annual process with the SRUSF broadband grants, is that correct?
That's right. They do not
Okay.
conflict. in any way.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, discussion? Well, thank you for presenting. I'll go ahead and move the recommended order in this case for approval.
Actually, I do want to clarify. So the proposal that I was making was to include a statement that if we receive this information from any of the ETCs that have not been recertified, that they could be recertified via single signature order.
Okay, just to clarify, do those include the carriers on exhibit B and C or just D?
Well, when I was thinking about it this morning, I was thinking about just D, but it could also apply to B and C. Is that correct?
Yes, and the order is drafted so that as soon as we receive it, they will be added. So the
Okay.
commission won't need to act anymore. This order will be approving them.
Yeah.
The only carrier that could be affected by your addition is NMPRC, basically, because the order allowed for the other ones to just be done automatically.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay.
Correct.
And so the commissioners have not seen that language. I did give OGC just a brief statement. And so assuming there's no opposition to that, I would like to amend the motion to approve the order with an additional statement. Wait, it hasn't been seconded
Yeah,
yet.
we don't have a motion yet because nobody seconded.
Okay, I'll second the motion and offer an amendment to include a statement that if we receive the information or a demonstration from one of these ETCs that they should be recertified, that it could be done via single signature order.
Perfect.
Can I ask a point of clarification? What would the process be now as the order is currently written
So.
for a company to be recertified?
So for each different list, there's a different process because they're in different steps of
Okay.
recertification. For exhibit C, they don't have any more federal reporting requirements, so the order just asks them to provide a self-certification if they want to. And if they provide a self-certification before Thursday, September 26th, when the commission logs on to the USAC portal, they'll be recertified. And then for exhibit D, for plateau, when the commission signs on to the portal, if they are on the portal, they will be certified just like everybody else. And then for NMPRC, they provide a motion explaining why they should be recertified, providing the required reporting requirements and a self-certification. And then the commission would consider that motion in open meeting.
Okay, so Commissioner Aguilera is proposing a simplification of that process
Exactly.
such that a single signature order would suffice.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
So I think we need maybe a second for the amendment.
Yeah, I second.
Any further discussion? Okay, so we are voting on the amended motion to adopt the order with language provided that the carrier listed on Exhibit D can be recertified through the process described by Ms. Avila Stephans and Commissioner Aguilera. Commissioner Ellison.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell.
Aye.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Aye.
The motion to approve the order with the modifications passes unanimously, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Don't go anywhere. Next up, case 2400245 UT. Commission's 2024 annual report to legislature regarding SRUSF. Again, presentation.
So last month, the commission put out a draft annual report to receive comments, and the commission received 3 comments. Excuse me. So yes, the commission received 3 comments, one from New Mexico Exchange Carrier, which was largely in support of the report and supports the commission opening a workshop as soon as possible to address the more comprehensive 2025 report to the legislator. Mescalero Apache suggested that the commission ask the legislator to use some of the funds for sustainability support to cover the cost of operating, maintaining, and upgrading the broadband network. But the order before the commission says that they would like that recommendation to be developed a little bit further before the commission decides whether to adopt it. There are a couple questions raised with that recommendation. So the order encourages Mescalero Apache to bring the suggestion during the 2025 report workshop. And then the AG suggested that the commission provide an explanation as to how the surcharge for the SRUSF is calculated, and suggested that the commission add maps explaining the progress in broadband, and the new annual reports adopts those suggestions. And another difference between the draft report and the draft before the commission today is that that draft report recommended that the legislator increase the cap in the SRUSF by $7 million. And that the reasoning behind that recommendation was that was the estimate of how much the commission would have needed to award all of the eligible broadband programs in this year's broadband docket. But there have been changes to the broadband docket, and now the commission estimates suggest that they'll be able to fund all eligible projects without any increases in the fund. So the reasoning behind the recommendation no longer holds. So it with the new report does not have that recommendation, and instead holds off on making a recommendation until the 2025 annual report, which will include a stakeholder input process. And I will stand for questions.
Thanks again. Any questions or discussion on the report?
No, thank you.
Just want to thank Ms. Avila Stephans for the report here, and also want to note that we received good feedback, and especially from the Department of Justice. I thought they had really good additions that were incorporated into the report. So, just want to say thank you for those efforts.
I would also say appreciate all the work that has gone into this report. It's an important function that we fulfill, the SRUSF grants, and appreciate the work that has gone into this.
So having heard that, I will move for approval of the issuing of the report to the legislature.
I second.
Commissioner Ellison.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell.
Aye.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Aye.
The motion to approve the order passes unanimously, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. And thank you again. Next up is case 24-00239 UT. It's Duncan Valley Electric Co-op approval of issuance of secured promissory note in the amount of $2 million. Do we have Ms. Lang here?
Good morning, Commissioners, Mr. Chair. I am appearing via Zoom today.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Before the Commission is the matter of Duncan Valley Electric Cooperative or DVEC's application for approval and authorization for securities for the principal amount to not exceed $2 million for the purpose of construction of utility plan and upgrade its meter reading system. OGC has drafted a final order. Let me backtrack. There's a recommended decision has been issued by hearing examiner Tatiana Perez Vallejo, and OGC has drafted an order adopting the recommended decision. Just a brief history. The application was filed with the Commission by DVEC on July 1st of this year. The application requested that the Commission's approve and authorize for DVEC to execute and deliver loan documents to the National Rural Utilities Cooperative Finance Corporation, or known or CFC, which may include one or more promissory notes to not exceed the total amount of $2 million. DVEC explained in the application that the loan documents would include a mortgage pledging and mortgaging utility assets in connection with a loan agreement with CFC. The application also stated that the financing is to be used for the construction of utility plant and upgrade meter reading system. On July 3rd, DVEC filed its direct testimony. On July 9th, the hearing examiner issued a procedural order which extended the statutory review period to September 12th. And July 11th, an affidavit by DVEC was filed. August 12th, staff filed its direct testimony recommending approval of the application. August 13th, hearing examiner ordered and issued an order vacating the hearing set and for evidence to be admitted, having found good cause to do so. Rebuttal testimony was due August 15th and none was filed. No motions for leave to intervene were filed and none were written, and no written comments were filed. The application is thus unopposed. August 20th, parties filed a notice of waiver of their right to file exceptions to the recommended decision, which was issued by the hearing examiner on the 21st of August. Very briefly, the recommended decision found 5 points. It found that following the consummation of the loan agreement, mortgage agreement, and promissory note, the aggregate amount of DVEC's securities outstanding will not exceed the fair value of its properties and business. DVEC showed that the application is not inconsistent with the interests of the public and demonstrated that the proposed loan agreement will be in the public interest because the $2 million loan, up to $2 million loan, will finance infrastructure improvements essential to provide better and adequate services to its members, customers. DVEC has shown by preponderance of evidence in the record that its application satisfies the requisite elements of commission approval of the utility financing under the Public Utility Act, New Mexico Statutes 62-6-6 and 62-6-7. The recommended decision also found that DVEC demonstrated that the proceeds of the loan agreement will be dedicated to uses that fall squarely within the purpose permitted under Section 62-6-6B. And finally, the recommended decision recommended that the Commission approve DVEC's application. On September 11th, the Commission extended the review period of the application to September 20th, which is tomorrow, to allow the Commission to review and consider the application at today's open meeting. As stated previously, OGC has drafted an order accepting and adopting and approving the recommended decision to approve the application, and I stand for any questions.
Thank you for that presentation. Do we have any questions?
Ms. Lang, this co-op is a multi-jurisdictional co-op with service territory in Arizona as well as New Mexico. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so in order to issue or to accept a new loan, they were required to both go before the Arizona Corporation Commission as well as ourselves, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and I suppose it's not clear whether these funds would be used in the New Mexico portion, in the Arizona portion, or whether they even provided that sort of detail in their application.
It was not apportioned that way, but DVEC did state that the majority of their customers are located in Arizona with over 2,000 electric meters, as opposed to over 300 electric meters in New Mexico. So presumably, the upgrades of the infrastructure the monies would be used to upgrade infrastructure a lot more in Arizona than New Mexico, but it wasn't stated.
Okay, and did they state the terms of the loan, or have they gotten to that stage yet?
We have not gotten to that stage. My understanding is they will take these approvals from both commissions and take it to CFC and negotiate.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion?
None for me. Thank you.
I move for approval of the proposed order in this case.
I second.
Commissioner Ellison,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell,
Aye.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Aye.
The motion to approve the order passes unanimously, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next up is case 240028. Comes Mr. Fisk. Potential amendments or potential repeal of quality of service and consumer protection standards applicable to large ILECs. Take it away, Mr. Fisk.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. So this was a rulemaking process in response to the 2023 passage of Senate Bill 41, which, among other things, required the commission to bring parity of regulation. That was the title, between the one large ILEC, large incumbent local exchange carrier in the state, which is CenturyLink, which is now an affiliate of a subsidiary, I believe, of Lumen Technologies. That is the only incumbent carrier in the state that serves over 50,000 access lines. It's a definition and regulated under New Mexico, the New Mexico Telecommunications Act, which is what was amended by Senate Bill 41. The actual language of the bill and now the amended statute is that the incumbent local exchange carriers that are subject to the New Mexico Telecommunications Act shall be regulated in the same manner as incumbent rural telecommunications carriers are regulated under the separate Rural Telecommunications Act. And the commission, in their initial order in this matter, stated as a preliminary finding that repeal of two of the rules that were passed, that were adopted by the commission in the past few years, 171124 and 171125 NMAC, which applied only to large incumbents like CenturyLink, which were a quality of service rule and a consumer protection rule that as the commission has not applied such rules to rural incumbents and does not believe that it has the jurisdiction to do so because the Rural Telecommunications Act does not expressly provide for any regulation of the rural incumbent carriers except for very limited price increase regulation and really nothing else. Of course, the Rural Telecom Act does provide for the SRUSF, the State Rural Universal Service Fund, and the commission can, can regulate pursuant to that, make, add requirements that as a condition of receiving support that are consistent with the act. But just general regulation of the rural ILECs is something the commission doesn't do, and that's based on a long time interpretation of the Rural Telecommunications Act, which is something with that our former head of our telecom bureau, Michael Ripperger, and I had discussed quite a bit, and then staff filed comments in this matter saying that I believe repeal is the correct course of action to comply with Senate Bill 41. CenturyLink filed similar comments saying that repeal is the way to go. The commission had said in its order issuing notice of proposed rulemaking or order issuing NOPR and then the NOPR itself that the commission would consider alternatives to repeal if there were any commenter who believed that there was still some jurisdiction for the commission here to regulate in a limited way or amend the rules instead, and no one took that position. The only comments received were from staff and CenturyLink, except a comment that was made by Donna Venable on her own behalf. She actually is affiliated with Continental Divide Electric Co., but she made this on her own behalf, this comment that she was concerned about what would happen if these rules were repealed and the effect of the statute itself as allowing CenturyLink to withdraw service entirely. So this order would also address that comment, saying if CenturyLink wants to withdraw from service in any part of its service territory, it has to seek commission approval under the New Mexico Telecommunications Act because it has carrier of last resort obligations. So CenturyLink probably would not be able to abandon such service if there's no other carrier to pick it up there. So oh, and by the way, I made one revision since I sent this to you. There were revisions that I had made and sent earlier in the week, but I noticed that in paragraph 7, in the first sentence, it had read, the commission found that this docket should be open for the consideration of the potential adoption of amendments, where it should, I would add, for the consideration of the potential repeal of, or in the alternative, potential adoption of amendments to those two rules. So that was the only change I made since you received a revised version earlier this week. CenturyLink had brought up in its comments that there are two other rules that it believes should be amended, 171116 NMAC and 171122, which are consumer protection and quality of service regulations that are applicable to all carriers except incumbent rural telecommunications carriers. These are rules that existed before the rules that were adopted by the commission in response to amendments that were made to the New Mexico Telecommunications Act a few years ago, the ones that the commission is considering repeal or amendment of. And they're listed as being the statutory authority as being some of the more general telecom statutes, which I would say, and Michael Ripperger, who was, someone who'd been here, someone who consulted with about these older rules because he had been here for I think 20 years, said, he saw those older rules as supplanted by our later rules that followed the amended New Mexico Telecommunications Act, which is more specifically applied to CenturyLink by its terms. And whereas these older rules, they cited more general provisions, telecom provisions that would be superseded by the more specific provisions that exist today. In fact, the only part of the New Mexico Telecommunications Act that was cited as statutory authority for these two rules was a portion that's been repealed since then. But what CenturyLink is asking for, that the scope of these rules as stated in the rules, currently for both of the rules, it says that the rules apply to all carriers except incumbent rural telecommunications carriers. And now, they say, CenturyLink argues that to be regulated in the same manner, these should also be changed to say, except incumbent rural telecommunications carriers and large incumbent carriers, because that's how that would achieve the same scope and same manner of regulation for these two rules. Like I said, we haven't really been applying these rules to either rural ILECs or to large ILEC we have, CenturyLink. But they also noted that because this term all carriers except incumbent rural carriers would include competitive local exchange carriers, and that would be in conflict with the New Mexico Telecom Act, which also has a provision for certificating competitive carriers. Competitive carriers are supposed to be regulated at a very low level under the federal 1996 Federal Act, and our act is the same. We only certificate them at the beginning of when they want to begin providing service in the state. So I think that CenturyLink is right that these rules, and we have not applied these rules to CLECs, competitive carriers, before either. This is a whole. I've given you a lot of detail on this because I think there's some what CenturyLink is arguing has some merit. But there are other questions that are raised about how to treat these for the CLECs, because it might be that we should consider repealing these rules, but we cannot do that. This order would find we cannot do that in this proceeding under this notice, because this notice was not noticed for amendment or repeal of 171116 or 171122. If the commission would like, I think it would be a good idea to open a proceeding. I could bring that at the next open meeting or the following open meeting. Like I said, we have not been applying these rules to either CenturyLink or the CLECs, and maybe we should repeal them or make the change that CenturyLink has asked for. But again, we can't do it in this proceeding. So with that, sorry that was a bit long-winded. I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions, discussion?
Mr. Chair, I do have a couple of points here in in paragraph 20, it stated that the commission agrees with staff and CenturyLink that the RTA does not authorize the commission to apply service quality regulation or consumer protection regulation to rural ILECs. I simply have not had a conversation or delved into the Rural Telecommunications Act enough to make that statement. I really personally hesitate to draw that conclusion, and I'm considering an amendment to this that would simply say the commission does not currently apply service quality regulation or consumer protection regulation to rural ILECs, or does not apply service quality regulation. So I think all we have to do here is recognize that we are not applying the service quality regulation to rural ILECs. And therefore, since we have been told that we need to regulate the large carriers in the same way that we regulate the rural carriers, we ought to repeal our service quality standards for the large carriers. I think just observing the fact that we don't regulate, we don't have service quality regulation for rural ILECs is enough. We don't need the value judgment.
Commissioner, that's absolutely a possibility to avoid making the finding about the scope of the Rural Telecommunications Act, and just say that we don't. We don't do that. We don't regulate that.
Right.
So that's something we absolutely could do.
I would be fine with amending the sentence. I did want to offer two potential options. One of them would be to delete that sentence and the word thus in the next sentence. And then the other option would be, instead of saying that we do not apply, we can say that the commission agrees with staff and CenturyLink that repealing these amendments would create parity in how we treat the rural ILECs and the ILECs.
And either of those would be fine as well.
Sorry to complicate it further, but I don't think it looks great if this sort of implies that there's some law that we do not apply. And that's the nuance that I was trying to correct there, at least in my view.
Could you clarify, Commissioner Aguilera, which law would you be referring to that we're not?
RTA.
Does the current wording imply that we're not applying the RTA, or?
No, I think if we say that we do not apply it.
I see.
Yeah.
Just in the interest of moving this forward, let's just delete the sentence and the word thus at the beginning. Or we could go ahead and defer this to another meeting so Commissioner Ellison has time to get up to speed.
Either way is fine.
I would, for simplicity, I would propose to delete it and the word thus.
Okay, so I move for approval of the potential order with the edit to paragraph 20 that we just discussed.
I second, and I do have a little bit of discussion. Yeah, so I want to note here that CenturyLink is asking for additional revisions, and however, we did not notice that other rules could be changed. And so that is why the order here is finding that they are beyond the scope.
Yes.
I want to note that nothing here precludes CenturyLink from petitioning the commission to consider these amendments in another docket where they are noticed. And then as to whatever legacy rules that we might have, I'm not in a hurry to repeal those. I mean, they might be helping someone, and so that's something that I would want to discuss. I think we also have a lot of other priorities, and taking another look at those rules right now does not seem like the highest priority to me. So I would not be in favor at this time of repealing them or starting a new docket to repeal them. That's all.
And I did want to make a brief comment here as well. I asked our consumer relations head, Mr. Jimenez, about complaints that we've received against the large carriers. And he said that we've had 29 complaints to date against CenturyLink, and 90% of those complaints were regarding the quality of service. So issues such as outages or delayed repairs. I think consumers have concerns, and we're gonna continue to receive complaints even if we repeal this service quality standards as I think we should, because the law has spoken that we need to have parity in how we're treating the rural companies. But I did want to point out that we've had what I see is a non-negligible number of complaints about service quality, and I suspect that we're going to continue to receive those complaints.
Thank you, Commissioner. And just to clarify, I've been informed by CRD that CenturyLink has been often cooperative with when it came to informal complaints about quality of service. It is voluntary cooperation, because even before this 2023 legislation, a few years ago, CenturyLink did get, I'm sorry, the legislature did pass an amendment to the New Mexico Telecommunications Act that didn't prevent the commission from having these rules and enforcing them, having staff enforce them, but it did expressly prevent the commission from considering formal complaints about quality of service. So that was already something outside of our jurisdiction, but CenturyLink has, I've been told they've been cooperative in, just working with CRD to resolve informal complaints.
I think we're ready for a vote.
And just to clarify the nature of this vote, it is a vote to adopt the order with the following amendment to paragraph 20, deletion of the middle paragraph, or excuse me, deletion of the second sentence in that paragraph, and then deleting thus from the third sentence in paragraph 20.
Yes.
Commissioner Ellison,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell,
Aye.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Aye.
The motion to approve the order with the modification discussed passes unanimously, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and
And thank you,
Commissioners.
Mr. Fisk. Thank you. So what we have left is a few discussion items. I'm also out of water, so I was gonna suggest take a 10-minute break and be back at noon.
That's great. All right, thank you.
Okay, it's noon. We're back. This is the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission regular open meeting. Next up is a presentation by Jason Montoya, Director of our Pipeline Safety Bureau, or Bureau Chief, for the man who knows all about pipeline safety. Is going to talk about just some recent issues in utility lines being stricken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Again, always a pleasure to be here. I don't know if the audience can see the text. It looks like the Zoom login is blocking it on my screen. It's a little different, but I don't know if Jordan could maybe address that. I think
We could see it. We could see it clearly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jordan. I distributed this presentation. I made a couple of minor edits to it since Monday, but I'll highlight those during the presentation. The focus of the first half of and majority of the presentation is just going to be to discuss and introduce the commission and others to the three major fiber build out projects that are ongoing in New Mexico. And we project that these will continue throughout New Mexico over the next 5 to 7 years. I'll start with Comcast, which is probably getting a lot of the attention because it seems like they broke ground well ahead of the other two, with the focus of expanding their services and territory in Rio Rancho. And so what you currently see on the screen is a purple border where the entire build out, the proposed build out currently is, and green highlighted sections, lots, etc., is where underground footage has already been installed, including the extension to customers, both business and residential customers. On the right hand side of the screen there, you can see what the build out is, 3.6 million feet in just Rio Rancho alone. They have well over 1 million feet, and these numbers are based on an export and analysis as of September 11th. So there's been a lot of activity since then, of course, so numbers may be a little dated when compared to today. As far as the homes and businesses, they project about 45,000 customers. And obviously, when all the fiber is in the ground, they're going to be competing, right? And so that's kind of what their target number is. And they have since connected and or extended service to about 11,500. And just I can pause in between each project, Chairman, if you want me to just get through it and then stand for questions at the end. It's for preference.
Yeah, no, I looked at your presentation and just looking forward to hearing what you got to say. But if either commissioner wants to zero in on a project, yeah, let's just have a conversation.
Okay. The next project is Vexus Fiber, and they have two areas in New Mexico, the Albuquerque, and then the next slide is going to focus around Las Cruces. I got this information directly from Vexus. The total footage for this particular project is 18,000. Of course, that's aerial and underground. They're currently excavating in the orange shaded areas. So both most of the activity and involvement that the Pipeline Safety Bureau has been with is in Northeast Albuquerque. So the Northeast Heights primarily. There's some activity around I-25. I'm not sure how well that's going to go with the big DOT project that it just is blocking up all of the traffic in that area. And then, of course, the other orange shaded area. So the Las Cruces fiber has also got a lot of attention. That's about a $50 million capital investment. You can see they're proposing 50 plus new permanent jobs. That's almost 3,000 total feet of construction. The other telecom company, which was actually new to me, is Easy Fiber. Not sure if anybody's heard the name Easy Fiber, but they have definitely moved into New Mexico and are currently underway. And we're struggling a little bit with getting Easy Fiber to the same pace as, or at least comparable to, the Vexus and Comcast fibers, because there's been some difficulty in locating some of the critical infrastructure in and around their excavation sites. And so we've been instrumental in making a legitimate attempt to assist them in making sure that their projects don't experience any more significant delays. And so you can see the last two bullet points kind of compare what they projected and what we believe would be a reasonable volume of work per week, per industry, and per the resources, which is 50,000 feet a week. And that is with very little or no distractions and allowing a locator to actually go out and mark an excavation site to protect the underground infrastructure. And so maybe back of the napkin calculations, but my discussions with the utility companies such as P&M and gas company and telecommunication providers, well, we believe 50,000 is pretty reasonable and fair for the industry to target per week. And so that's kind of why you see at 5 million feet, it take approximately 2 years. Right now, because of the delays, they've only gotten a little over, maybe close to 11,000 feet now in the ground. And so that would project about a 10-year project. I believe that's going to ramp up here in the very near future, as early as next week. And hopefully we can get that company back on pace. I'm sharing this slide because I'm really impressed with what Easy Fiber is presenting and proposing, and the preliminary phases, the design phases, all the way leading up to the utility coordination efforts. And so I won't spend a whole lot of time reading this. I think I shared it with the commissioners, but you can see how far in advance they're notifying the communities and other parties and stakeholders alike about their projects. Door hangers, we all know what we do with door hangers for the most part. If you're anything like me, I probably look at it and put it on the table for somebody else to read, or maybe it finds its way somewhere else. But so they do need to follow up with that. The rule actually requires a lot of coordination between excavators and utility companies throughout the duration of the project. And so what I've done for you commissioners, I've kind of taken a snapshot in time and analyzed realistically what is this, the volume of work that the telecommunications industry is contributing to New Mexico. How has it affected our damage prevention program? Obviously, there's been an uptick in tickets, right? Excavation locate requests. By default, you're likely going to have an uptick in damages, concerns, and issues. The industry ratio that we always try to match up with is 2 damages per 1,000 locate requests. And so I still believe we are well underneath that industry threshold, quote unquote, acceptable threshold. For me, 0 damages is acceptable. But that's kind of where we measure performance throughout the industry and a lot of discussions that we have nationally. So for this particular project, just running January 1st, just looking back this calendar year, what has transpired? We have 215 damages. And I broke it down for you based on critical, and it's all important. But in order for us to ensure and enforce a reasonable rule, I kind of differentiated infrastructure to critical and non-critical. Okay, like your buried service wire to your home is kind of labeled non-critical in some instances. And so based on the investigation, we may identify that to be a critical gas, power, fiber, 911 services. All of that is critical by default, regardless of location or regardless of any outages. And then of the 215, there are still 73 that remain open and are currently under investigation. The ones that we have closed, some people might find this surprising that the utility companies are at fault for more of the damages than the contractors. And initially, it was around 50-50. Now it's still around 50-50, 40-53 based on the numbers. But I think if you hear the Comcast, this is a Comcast project, you hear of a contractor that called in the locate request, and the general public by default is going to assume that's the responsible party. But based on our investigations, it's pretty split between utilities responsible for at-fault damages, as is the contractors. Of the 215, we've identified and abandoned 10 abandoned facilities. And when I say no damage and 14 no damages, this is more of a near miss situation. And near miss is an industry term that can be subject to anybody's interpretation, because it's like, well, if it's a near miss, then you didn't hit it. But they still call it in and as a discovered utility that wasn't marked, or that they identified it during excavation activities. And so therefore we still require them to stop, because we don't expect contractors to know if an underground infrastructure is live or abandoned, right? Let's leave that up to the utility companies themselves to deploy a crew or a technician to determine that. And so about 14 of them. And then non-mechanical by rule, the commission encourages the industry to call 811 and report damages and follow the rules when digging with a shovel or a pick or a post hole digger, but it's labeled as non-mechanical and therefore they're not really subject to any enforcement actions. But we do want to monitor and keep data on non-mechanical damages because we do still conduct investigations, but there aren't any consequences. The reason why we do investigations is because if there's a civil litigated matter, then they could accept the state record to determine who's at fault and who's responsible and liable to who. So that's the reason why that's an important data point for me. Excuse me. Still got the runny nose like everybody else. I shared this with you just to kind of introduce you to liability, right? And just being very transparent of what our expectations are. Obviously, you fail to comply, you are subject to enforcement actions, including possible civil penalties. And so our enforcement actions are assessed based upon the circumstances. I'd mentioned earlier, critical versus non-critical. We look at the performance of an individual over the previous 2 years. How many alleged violations has this party received? Are they collaborating with the industry? Are they cooperating with our inspectors? A lot of that discussion takes place during the investigation and even before we issue probable violations. And there's just a brief summary of what liability could consist of and what responsible parties could be responsible for. So downtime, cost of the actual damage. There's very specific language in the statutes and rules that dictate what an individual could claim another party for, depending on who's at fault. So I want to share that with you. This is a slide I take out of our normal excavation law and procedure training sessions that we provide throughout the state of New Mexico, and it's taken right out of the statutes and rules. So obviously they're subject to up to $5,000 for the first offense, not to exceed $25,000 for any subsequent offense. The excavation laws, the commission, and everybody knows it's enforced and insured and then enforced by the Pipeline Safety Bureau. We actually adopted a rule, I believe it was 2018 commission, that a damage no longer need to occur in order for us to enforce compliance, which I think is very important if we are going to ever trend down and continue towards zero damages in New Mexico. Because there's obviously consequences. Just because you didn't call 811 and you didn't damage anything, you obviously got lucky. And so there should still be enforcement actions in our opinion. And so that's now in the rule as well. And this is just a graphic of what that we shared to the industry on what this could entail. You know, if you add up every data point between 0 and 10, I mean, this subjects somebody to anywhere from 0, 811. I don't know where I got 811. I think that's the call before you dig number, but that's the first offense of what we assess to the industry. I think it catches a lot of people's attention, and then it gradually increases over time. But you know, if you just added it up, you know, 9 is 20, 18 is 35. 7 is another 10, there's 45. And so over, you know, a 2-year performance period, alleged violators, especially those repeat offenders, could be subject to some pretty hefty fines over time. And so we are advocates to educate and prevent recurrence first. I think that's the intent of the guidelines that I've shared with you that we've kind of adopted in the Pipeline Safety Bureau. And I think it's been effective, in my opinion. I think we've gotten a lot of attention from the industry. We've gotten them to be engaged in our New Mexico Regional Common Ground Alliance conferences and seminars. And with that, Commission, pretty short and brief, but I know I shared a lot of information with you guys in those handouts, and I'm sure, Commission, you may have some questions or need some more information about this.
I really appreciate you coming in today. I've noticed the activity in my neighborhood. A lot of digging going on, and so I think it's always good to remember, you know, we need to, I think, promote it more, the call before you dig, but seems like especially now in the amount of activity that's going on out there. So anyway, just appreciation for you laying out the numbers and explaining it to us today is where I'm at now. Anybody other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, I did want to mention that it just so happens that the most recent meeting of the NARU Gas Committee dealt with this very topic, and some information was provided that nationally, the number of natural gas pipeline damages due to telecom work has doubled from 2020 to 2022. This one gas utility in particular, called NiSource, they talked about their fiber related damages going up by that 20% of all their damage incidents were due to fiber, 20% overall, and that the fiber related damages increased 90% from 2020 to 2023. I would just be interested if we keep those kind of statistics, how many of our pipeline damages were due to fiber, and are we seeing that increase?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Ellison, we have a lot of data at our fingertips, so I can definitely get you something similar to the NARU NiSource report. I appreciate you sharing that with us. I will tell you that it may not be similar in New Mexico. I'll just use the city of Rio Rancho as an example because I've been so engaged in that project. We are the Comcast Xfinity, one and the same, right? They are starting to provide telecommunication service to really old neighborhoods that have gas stub outs that have never been mapped or marked and are now being discovered through directional drilling activities. So, I think that's part of contributing to the issue nationally, because, they're focusing on unserved or underserved areas, and these have been forever. And so you're really dealing with old neighborhoods with infrastructure underground that was never required to be mapped. I mean, we're discovering some old Bell South system telecommunication lines that are still look to be in quality condition, to be honest with you, but are abandoned, and so it's like, it's difficult to measure that and compare it, but I do have that data at my fingertips. Let me do a little bit more data analysis, if I may, Commissioner Nelson, and get back to you as far as it's telecommunications, right? It's not fiber. So telecommunication projects that have contributed to gas or pipeline incidents. I like to always share at fault though, because I think that report says because these telecommunication providers are out there digging, it's their fault. It's not always their fault. I just kind of shared that with you in the ratio of 53 and 40 between contractor and utility company. So I think that's a huge data point that the industry should take into consideration, in my opinion. But nonetheless, I can pretty much assure you it's very similar in any state. I mean, the infrastructure bill and all the money that's being dumped into these projects, it's a national issue. We've been talking about it at the table for at least, I think the first project applications were as far back as 2020 and 2021. So, ramping up and being prepared for these projects isn't anything new. It shouldn't be, in my opinion. But I'll definitely get you some more information on specifically around natural gas pipelines.
Great, thank you.
Sir.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a couple of questions. First is if you can explain what kind of depths different lines or pipes are normally used.
Sure.
How deep they're buried, and then also how are the strikes identified? If you have directional drilling, if there's a line, maybe you're smelling it, or, what is normally the method that is, somebody finds out that there was a strike?
Sure. No, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, great question. In full transparency and Jason's disclaimer, the depth is silent in the statutes and rules that we have jurisdiction and authority to enforce. We rely on mechanical and plumbing codes, which CID obviously is the state agent that regulates that. And so when we conduct investigations or determine if a utility was accurately marked, we operate on a horizontal distance of 18 inches. So the rule requires a horizontal distance of 18 inches either side of a mark. And so our depth is silent. I can't really enforce it, but we've been discovering some really shallow utilities. And obviously shallow because of wind erosion or water erosion. Some utilities are even embedded in asphalt because, as you can imagine, this over time, they just keep pouring all of this asphalt, and somebody goes to saw cut asphalt or concrete, and sure enough, they pull up a utility within that, trench. And so it ranges, it's all over the map. And to be honest with you, I mean, we've seen it on the surface, we've seen it 5-6 feet. There are some pipelines that we're working with New Mexico Gas Company that are over 30 feet deep. So it takes time to expose them because you have to identify them to prevent damage, and especially to a critical infrastructure like a transmission line at a high pressure. So I'm sorry, I can't pinpoint the exact rule. I will tell you, when a new gas pipeline is installed, the federal regulations that we have adopted and enforced on the pipeline safety side of our program requires a minimum of 18 inches on the service line and 24 inches on the main. And in some other areas, it could be 36. And so that's at the time of construction for pipelines. The other question you had is of how do we determine when a damage occurs? We honestly rely on the contractors for the most part. Now, they do smell gas. I mean, when they hit a live gas line, it starts hissing, and you hit a gas line fairly quickly. I was a lead investigator on an incident that occurred a few years ago on Wyoming, just up the street from New Mexico Gas Company's headquarters, and they were doing similar excavation activity and drilling. They had hit a gas line approximately 220 feet is what I think I measured. And I know it may be difficult to imagine this, but we calculated with some other industry experts, the operator of that drill machine probably. And so that's how quickly the smell of gas can move from wherever the damage occurs. But I think here's part of the rule. If there's a marked facility, contractors are required to pothole, expose prior to encroaching that 18-inch horizontal distance that I explained earlier. We also require them, if they are going to encroach it, they have to pothole it and maintain a 12-inch clearance around the utility at minimum. And they have to visually observe it, because in New Mexico, blind boring is not permitted. So if they potholed it, thought what its depth was, and then backfilled it and drilled, that's blind boring in New Mexico. And so that's subject to enforcement. So we have to have a person physically watch and maintain that 12-inch clearance. And so it's typically when they're not marked is how do I know a damage occurred? Outages for telecommunication is when we become aware of it. For example, we had a damage this morning. Sparklight, another telecommunication company, had discovered an outage. The damage actually occurred on August 22nd, and we barely became aware of it today. And so over time, I think we'll rely on the contractor. They're obligated by law to make 3 phone calls when they are aware of a damage. If they fail to do so and a utility becomes aware of a damage, the utility has 30 days from occurrence to submit what we refer to as a third-party damage report. And so there's a lot of mechanisms and avenues for us to find out about a damage. I think in one of my presentations to you before, we're averaging about 2,700 damages reported a year throughout the state. So we are benefiting tremendously from the new staff. We have all 6 damage prevention investigators in place in 6 regions. So our ability to deploy and respond promptly has drastically improved. And so I think things have quieted down from the Comcast project tremendously. I mean, we were getting 15 calls a day, 10 damages a day, and now we might get 1, 2, 3 a week. So it's with our collaboration with the municipalities, including the city of Rio Rancho and city of Albuquerque, and their efforts in controlling the permitting process. The volume was a big concern at the beginning. So I think our efforts have been very effective in trying to protect the infrastructure and addressing the community's complaints. So I hope that answers your question.
Does, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thanks again, Mr. Montoya, and keep up the good work.
Right. Thank you.
Next is Commissioner Ellison. You wanted to lead a discussion on the Western Resource Adequacy Program.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I did want to give an update on this program. I'm not sure, Mr. Gutierrez, if I can share my screen here. If not, that's not a big deal. I can still.
I just made you co-host, Commissioner Ellison.
Okay,
You're able
great.
to share. Yes.
Great, thank you. So these are just a few updates. There's been some developments in this program. What has happened most recently is that on August 30th, the Resource Adequacy Participants Committee, that's everybody who's signed up as part of RAP, they filed an expedited proposal for a change to the FERC tariff, which has meant that, there's been very little time for review, and that in fact the Western Power Pool Board is scheduled to vote on this today. I only found out about this from Weeb after our last open meeting, so there hasn't really been the chance to discuss it. It's a revised transition plan which would modify RAP's FERC tariff, and the way it would modify it is, right now the transition period is scheduled to go through March 15th, 2028. It would extend the transition period out another year, and it would reduce the penalties during that transition phase, which is something that the member utilities felt that they needed. They did not want to feel that they would expose themselves to large fines right off the bat. This transition plan includes the option of this resource adequacy program going binding the summer of 27. The utility would have to notify RAP by January 2026 if they wanted to take advantage of that. But the program is maintaining the fact that the default is that the whole program goes binding winter of 27-28. So at this point, it really is an opt-out program. So everybody, including PNM, who has signed up as a program participant, unless they opt out, the program will go binding winter of 2027-2028. And another interesting fact is that although the Western Power Pool is, they're administering this this RAP program, they have contracted to SPP, Southwest Power Pool, to actually run the program on a day-to-day basis. So that's in a nutshell, those are the developments, and so I suspect we'll hear of the board's decision fairly soon on this.
Yeah, thank you for that update. Commissioner Aguilera, do you have any questions about that?
No questions for me about that. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks again, Commissioner. Next up, communications with Chief of Staff, Ms. Corey.
Afternoon, Commissioners. Short update today, not a whole, I mean, there's a whole lot happening, but I don't think anything ready for prime time discussion here. I do want to let you know that our RFP to get a new e-docketing system and perhaps a document management system should be released soon, maybe as soon as next week. And we're hoping to have an award for that RFP by the end of this calendar year, going into the first half, the second half of the fiscal year, first half of the calendar year next year. We're hoping then to implement through that award. And I also want to just mention Lori and Brian. Lori in our ASD division and Brian in our IT division, they have really been doing the heavy lifting on this. So thank you to them for all their hard work. So we're getting to the exciting part. And then the last thing I want to highlight, the second thing I want to highlight, as you heard from me last time, PRC seminar is coming back around November 4th and 5th at the Roundhouse. We're confirming and firming up speakers and panels, and so we're really excited about that. And I have been just today actually working with Mr. Gutierrez, so watch your inboxes for our save the date on that. And then as we get closer, we will be publishing that agenda. So unless there's any other questions or something specific that you would like me to talk about, I guess I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, and good news on that RFP. And again, and thank you to Lori and Brian also. Yeah, I don't have any other questions. Commissioners, did you have any?
No questions for me. Thank you.
Thank you for your work, Ms. Curry, and I haven't responded yet to your email about the panel discussion, but I'd be happy to do that, and would like to brainstorm a bit about speakers for that.
Excellent, Mr. Chair, Commissioner. Then spoiler alert to everybody who's watching us, the seminar will have panels hosted by all three of our commissioners this year. So it's very exciting. I'm actually really excited.
I thought you were wanting to encourage people to attend.
It's not a panel made up of commissioners. It's a panel moderated by commissioners. So it's looking like it's shaping up to be a good seminar. And once again, it's likely to either be no cost or low cost to attorneys and anyone else who wants to attend. So we're working out those logistics because last year we had a little snafu in communication with the state bar. We've learned from our snafus and won't be repeating the same mistakes. So stay tuned for information about how to register.
Great, thank you. Communications with commissioners. Do you have anything, Commissioner Aguilera?
Just briefly, I want to put on your radar FERC's Order 1920, and how it has some opportunities for states to provide input into what the cost allocation method will be for transmission planning processes that are FERC jurisdictional. And there's like a state agreement process, for example, that could be used for different different projects that might be selected. And in order to develop what that process would be, there's an engagement window where we in theory would work with utilities and stakeholders to and I think other states to figure out what that state agreement process could look like. I think it would be very beneficial for us to be involved in that, and we do have some staff who are engaged with in discussions with the utilities, and so you know that is getting started. And I had an opportunity to meet with them yesterday with our staff here to get an update, and so you know there will be I'm assuming two separate conversations, one for SPP, which I think you know there's probably a good framework there with the RSC and the chairman who's a part of that to engage in those discussions. And then in the Western Interconnection, you know, with PNM and El Paso Electric, maybe it's West Connect, at least that's what I'm assuming, and is going to be the transmission planning region or stay the transmission planning region. So there's a lot of work I think that could be done here. I think that it is in our best interest to be involved. And so just wanted to highlight that, put it on your radar. Chairman, I don't know if you've heard anything from, you know, within the RSC about discussions within SPP or transmission planning, but with compliance filings currently due next June, there's the potential for an extension, but you know, we don't know that. I think there will be a lot of work that we'll need to do relatively soon. That was all I had.
Yeah, thank you. Just didn't expect that to be a segue to this, but this week I was in Salt Lake City. WEC has its annual meeting. There was two things I thought were worth highlighting for this group out of that is first, NERC is putting out their interregional transfer capability studies. So it kind of shows not state to state necessarily, but WEC to SPP and those type of transfer capabilities. There is some internal capability highlighted for, you know, for example, New Mexico is in a transfer region that's basically New Mexico and Colorado, and it shows first version is just analysis of current situation. There's another part 2 that's going to be coming out that will show based on resource plans what things are going to look like. It's a very valuable study. I think it informs things like these 1920 discussions. And then your question about SPP, that's an RTO and they have an annual planning process, and then SPP already has a concept for, and it's in practice for how to allocate costs from, you know, for example, they're building a lot of wind in Western Kansas. There's no load in Western Kansas, and the wind energy is being consumed in Kansas City and St. Louis. So they've settled on a formula for allocating those kind of costs. That's exactly the kind of thing I would expect we're going to be confronting in the West, especially Intermountain West, where very few of us live, but we have tremendous resources versus the coast. So anyway, those discussions will happen, and not just WEC working on interregional transfer studies, but there are also a lot of discussion on their long-term strategy. So WEC is confronting the concept that yes, lots of things are possible, lots of things are changing. They have a lot of strength in that organization. They want to make sure they use that strength to help the region grow reliably. So great conversation with WEC on long-term strategy. There will be it was kind of a kickoff conversation. There'll be something fleshed out at the meeting in December. And then I'm also expecting we're gonna see more on that. For example, maybe Western Conference in Portland or other places. So things are changing and people are recognizing there's opportunities like Rule 1920, and so lots going on. So just wanted to update you two gentlemen that we're gonna, future topics we're gonna see at these conferences with commissioners, but then also make sure utility division staff knows that there are some really good opportunities to plug in the early days of some big things that are going on. So encourage folks I think we're gonna need it just for context when these cases get developed, and it might be a few years down the road, but it'd be great if people start building their knowledge base now. But it's also, I think, a fantastic professional development opportunity. WEC has a bunch of technical committees that include hundreds of members, and so not just participating, but there's always leadership opportunities there. So anyway, just came back from WEC, very WEC happy. So I would share that. And then I'm gonna go back next week. They're gonna have an all staff training. WEC has kind of leaned into the work remotely model. So WEC staff is spread out all over the United States right now, but they're gonna bring everybody to Salt Lake next week. And so I'm gonna be on a panel with some other utility commissioners just sharing, well, this is how your work gets to me, or gee, it would be nice if WEC was doing that. So panel discussion, don't know where that's going to go, but if it's something interesting comes out of that, I'll update in a couple of weeks. So anyway, that was what I came prepared with for this meeting. Any other, having heard what you've heard, any other communications?
Just that on 1920, I think that it would be helpful to have some kind of a presentation, maybe at an open meeting, about it. And, I think it could go different ways. Maybe it's, the utility presenting or our staff here presenting on what the requirements for the utilities are and what opportunities are available to us as a state commission to engage in that process. So I think sometime, maybe in the next few months, we can have that. Maybe we probably should do it sooner, but and I can think about how that could look and propose something.
And I'd also expect that it's gonna be a conversation at CREPC in October.
Yes.
Last CREPC was like, well, they didn't listen to us. This CREPC, it's gonna be, how are we gonna make it work? So,
And I think that's a good venue for us to interact. I also think that having a conversation here will benefit because like Rita might be interested, or MNerd, and just making sure that as a state we're on the same page will help us going forward.
agreed. Commissioner Ellison, did you have anything else?
Just a few comments. Earlier this week, I spoke at a wind energy conference organized by Sandia National Labs. I made the presentation that I did available. I wanted that to be for your information and also for accountability purposes. If you think I made a mistake, please let me know. But I want you to know what I said, just so you know. Also, I haven't had any out-of-state trips for July, August, and September, and now I've got 3 coming up in fairly rapid succession. I'm going to this a Colorado workshop from September 27th to October 1st. being run out of Northwestern University. Their regulatory law and economics group does an annual workshop that I'll be attending. And then October 16th through 18th will be a meeting of the Natural Gas Task Force, an in-person meeting in Atlanta. I know we've got an open meeting on the 17th, and so I will get out of the session to attend the open meeting. Hopefully it's not going to be an all-day open meeting. I don't know if we can think about that, or if it's hard to modify anything, but I will be on Zoom for that open meeting. And then October 22nd through 24th will be this CREPC YRAB meeting in San Diego, which I plan to attend. And I understand that there'll be a discussion, a transmission discussion of this West Tech study on Monday, the 21st, and I may be able to attend some of that, but it's going to be a busy month.
Yeah, I agree. It was the old life's like a ketchup bottle. First and then it'll come, and then a lot'll haven't been traveling for a while, but it's pretty busy over the next couple of weeks. So. Right. So any objections to adjourning? We are adjourned.